"Ma'am, I need to see your boarding pass again," the flight attendant said with a dismissive tone. Her eyes narrowed as she examined the ticket. "Your boarding pass has to be confirmed first before you're allowed to board. So, you can't board this plane yet. Step aside for others to board." Elise, the black CEO, extended her boarding pass again, her expression calm despite the storm brewing inside her. "There's no mistake. I'm in seat 2A. Soon, a security guard approached, his hand gripping Elise's arm when she tried to explain her situation. His fingers dug into her jacket as he began pulling her away from the gate. Other passengers looked on, some concerned, some indifferent, some even nodding in approval. But within 30 seconds, something extraordinary happened. The massive departure screens throughout the terminal flickered, then went completely black. The boarding gate's electronic displays froze. Announcements over the PA system abruptly cut off mid-sentence. Confusion in the terminal amplified tenfold. Passengers who had been boarding stopped in their tracks. Airline staff stared at their dead terminals in disbelief. Gate 37B was in chaos. This wasn't just a normal delay. Something much bigger was unfolding. This story gives the biggest karma. When a woman thought to be nothing and denied boarding revealed who she really was, making the airline regret their decision. So, who exactly is Elise Washington? And how did she become powerful enough to bring an airline to its knees? Elise's journey to becoming one of America's most influential tech CEOs is extraordinary. Unlike many executives with privileged backgrounds, Elise came from nothing. Her mother worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over their heads. At 16, Elise was already showing remarkable talent with computers. While other teenagers hung out at the mall, she was fixing broken electronics from pawn shops, teaching herself to code on a second-hand computer her teacher had salvaged for her. By 17, she was making enough repairing computers for local businesses to help her mother pay rent. The road was never easy. Despite perfect SAT scores, she was waitlisted at every top tech school she applied to. She finally got into Northwestern on a partial scholarship, but had to work 2 jobs while carrying a full course load. After college, the pattern continued. At her first tech job, she watched as her white male colleagues with less experience were promoted above her. When she created an innovative scheduling algorithm that saved the company millions, her manager took credit. When she spoke up, she was labeled difficult and not a team player. But Elise doesn't break, she builds. Instead of fighting a system designed against her success, she created her own system. At 28, she mortgaged everything she owned to start Nexus Technologies. The first office was her studio apartment. Her first employees were 3 fellow graduates who believed in her vision enough to work for equity when she couldn't pay salaries. 15 years later, Nexus Technologies employed over 5,000 people globally and reported profits of $1.2 billion. Elise Washington wasn't just successful, she was a force of nature who transformed an industry. That morning, Elise was preparing for the most important deal of her career. In her penthouse overlooking Central Park, she packed lightly for her trip to Singapore. The Global Tech Innovation Summit wasn't just another conference. She would deliver the keynote address to secure a $500 million investment from the Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund. This wouldn't just expand Nexus, it would fund their most ambitious project yet. Unlike many executives who traveled with entourages, Elise preferred traveling alone. Long flights gave her time to think and strategize. She dressed simply but professionally. Black trousers, silk blouse, tailored blazer. Her only luxury was handcrafted leather loafers. What Elise didn't know was that her path would cross with Bradley Winters, CEO of Sky Globe Airlines. Once the pride of American aviation, Sky Globe's reputation had collapsed under his leadership. Their slogan, "The Sky's Elite," had become hollow. Bradley, at 68, was a third-generation executive who had inherited the CEO position as a birthright. Silver hair, bespoke suits, he looked the part. But appearances were deceiving. That morning, Elise's car pulled up to the departures terminal. She tipped the driver generously and rolled her carry-on inside. Her day of frustration began instantly. At premium check-in, a gate agent intercepted her. "Economy check-in is that way, ma'am." "I'm flying first class to Singapore," Elise replied calmly, showing her digital boarding pass. The agent barely glanced at it. "Economy check-in is that way," she repeated, this time with visible impatience. It was the first little cut of the day, one most white travelers would never experience. Elise didn't argue. She walked to the premium counter anyway. Another agent processed her check-in, though not without double-checking her booking with visible surprise. After checking her luggage, Elise headed to security with just her designer carry-on and briefcase. The premium security lane was nearly empty, a perk of first class. But as she approached the checkpoint, an agent waved her out of the line. Random security check. You'll need to go through enhanced screening. Elise watched as 3 white businessmen in suits walked through without issue. Every single person in the random enhanced line was a person of color. The male agent's pat-down went well beyond standard procedure, his hands lingering too long. Humiliation burned inside her, but she maintained composure. She'd learned long ago that anger would only worsen things. When she collected her belongings, she noticed something missing. Her watch. Not just any watch, but a custom-designed Patek Philippe worth $60,000, a symbol of everything she'd overcome. "Excuse me," she said. "My watch is missing." The agent barely looked up. If it was there, it would have come through. It was there. I placed it in the bin myself. What followed was 15 minutes of Elise insisting on reviewing security footage, while agents suggested she must have forgotten it at home. Finally, after she refused to move and threatened to call her attorney, a supervisor found the watch in a separate bin she had never used. By the time she reached Gate 37B, boarding for her flight had already begun. Despite the delays, Elise still had plenty of time to board. First-class passengers are usually boarded first or whenever they wish. As she approached the lane, a gate agent named Meredith looked at her with suspicion. "Excuse me, ma'am. This lane is for first-class passengers only. I'm in seat 2A, Elise replied, holding up her boarding pass. Meredith scrutinized it as though it were fake, then picked up the phone and spoke in hushed tones, glancing up at Elise with narrowed eyes. A supervisor approached, Richard Bronson. "Late 50s, permanent scowl. Is there a problem here?" he asked, speaking to Meredith, not Elise. "She says she has a first-class ticket," Meredith replied, emphasizing says. Richard took the boarding pass, eyeing Elise from head to toe. "Ma'am, are you aware first-class tickets on international flights are very expensive?" Nearby passengers chuckled. Others looked away. Elise's expression didn't change. "We'll need to verify your ticket." "There seems to be some kind of irregularity." "What irregularity?" Elise asked calmly. "I'll need to see additional documentation. Passport, credit card, company authorization." This was not required of anyone else. But Elise handed her passport and corporate credit card, refusing to provide company authorization, a document no airline had ever asked of any passenger. "You'll need to step aside while we verify this information," Richard said. "The flight needs to continue boarding." As other first-class passengers boarded with no issue, Elise was escorted to a desk away from the gate. She was told it would only take a few minutes. Minutes stretched into 20, then 40, then over an hour. Elise sat at the desk, watching her gate. She saw the final boarding calls, the jet bridge door closing. She also overheard Sky Globe employees laughing nearby. "Thinks she belongs in first class," one muttered. Probably her first time on a plane. Each word was a dagger. And then, the final blow. She watched the plane taxi away. Richard returned. "I regret to inform you that while we were verifying your information, your flight has departed. Unfortunately, you missed your boarding time." "I missed because your staff detained me," Elise said, her voice steady. Richard ignored her. "We can rebook you on the next flight in about 5 hours. Unfortunately, first class is fully booked. We can offer you economy." The insult was clear. Deny her seat. Pocket the price difference. "Show me the booking system," Elise demanded. "I'm not authorized." "Show me," she repeated, standing now, her calm confidence rattling him. Richard turned the monitor toward her. Elise saw what she suspected. 3 open first-class seats. "You're lying," she said simply. Richard quickly turned the monitor back. "Those are blocked for operational reasons." "What operational reasons?" Elise pressed. "I'm not at liberty to discuss." "Discriminatory reasons?" Her voice rose just enough to be heard by other passengers. You prevented me from boarding my original flight, and now you're lying about availability. Several travelers stopped to watch. Phones came out to record, Elise stated firmly. I demand to be rebooked in first class as compensation. Richard's face flushed. Lower your voice, ma'am. I will not be silenced when I am being discriminated against, Elise said. Richard signaled security. 2 guards approached. The taller one grabbed Elise's arm with force. Ma'am, you need to come with us. Take your hands off me. I've done nothing wrong. They yanked her away, her phone and documents scattering across the floor. As she bent to retrieve them, she noticed a familiar figure, Bradley Winters, Sky Globe CEO, watching with satisfaction. He muttered to a colleague, some people just don't know their place. At that moment, Elise's phone rang. She picked up. It was Marcus Chen, her chief strategy officer. The Singapore Sovereign Fund needs our decision by tomorrow, Marcus said. They need to know which airline we're recommending for the global corporate contract. Here came the first revelation. Nexus was selecting the airline for a $3.7 billion corporate travel contract covering over 40 multinational corporations. Today's flight was supposed to be Sky Globe's final evaluation, a test they had just failed spectacularly. I've seen enough, Elise said, staring directly at Bradley Winters. Remove Sky Globe from consideration. Draft the recommendation for Singapore Airlines instead. But Marcus had more news. Elise personally controlled 28% of Sky Globe stock through her private firm, making her the single largest shareholder, bigger than the Winters family. Passengers had no idea the woman being mistreated held the power to destroy Sky Globe's valuation with a single decision. Elise gave more instructions. Activate our voting shares. Call an emergency board meeting today. Cite shareholder concern over discriminatory practices. And Marcus, execute Plan Delta. Plan Delta wasn't a phrase for effect. It was a strategy she had developed for exactly this, when discrimination threatened both her dignity and her business. As Elise hung up, passengers shouted at her. Get her out of here! Some people don't know how to behave. One man shouted the ugliest, Go fly with your own kind. But then something unexpected. The airport officer, James Taylor, hesitated. Miss Washington? He asked quietly. Elise Washington from Nexus Technologies? He recognized her from a magazine cover. My daughter did her school report on you. She wants to be a software engineer because of you. This moment of recognition changed everything. Taylor subtly stepped between Elise and the hostile crowd, and then the departure boards flickered again. CNN broadcast breaking financial news. Sky Globe shares drop amid rumors of major shareholder sell-off. Travelers gasped, pulling out their phones to check stocks. Analysts speculated about the cause. Rumors of discrimination, civil rights violations, legal exposure. Bradley Winters' phone rang again and again. His face drained of color. Panic spread among Sky Globe staff. Soon, Elise's assistant Samantha Rivera arrived at the terminal, striding confidently with 4 members of Nexus Technologies' legal team. They carried leather portfolios and wore the expressions of people who could dismantle empires with paperwork alone. Elise, Samantha said, handing her a slim portfolio, the board members have been notified. They're assembling via video in 30 minutes. Elise straightened her blazer and walked, not toward the exit as Bradley demanded, but back toward Gate 37B, where the humiliation had begun. Officer Taylor did not stop her. Passengers parted, some filming, others whispering. The PA system crackled. Attention all passengers! Due to an administrative action, all Sky Globe Airlines flights are temporarily grounded. The announcement repeated in multiple languages. Confusion and anger erupted. Hundreds of passengers flooded the counters demanding answers. Gate Agent Meredith pointed at Elise loudly. If you hadn't disrupted our boarding, none of this would be happening. Richard Bronson joined in. This woman caused a major disruption because she couldn't follow simple instructions. The crowd turned hostile again. She's the reason my flight's canceled? Someone shouted. Why should one person ruin travel for hundreds? Officer Taylor stepped closer, sensing escalation. But Elise moved deliberately to a row of seats, stepped onto a chair, and elevated herself above the mob. My name is Elise Washington, she began, her voice strong and commanding. "I am the CEO of Nexus Technologies and the founder of Horizon Capital." A hush fell. Some passengers Googled her name, eyes widening as results flooded in. "I came here as a paying customer with a valid first-class ticket. I was denied boarding not because of anything I did, but because of what I look like. What happened to me today happens to people like me every day in airports across this country. The difference is that today it happened to someone with the power to demand accountability." Gasps spread. Phones streamed live. Local media crews rushed in, cameras rolling. Bradley Winters, panting from rushing across the terminal, froze at the sight of Elise elevated above the crowd, commanding their attention. He tried to intervene. "Miss Washington," he said loudly for cameras, forcing a cordial smile, "there's clearly been a misunderstanding. On behalf of Sky Globe Airlines, I personally apologize." Elise looked down at him with cold calm. "This isn't about inconvenience, Mr. Winters. This is about systemic discrimination. Discrimination you have personally fostered and encouraged." Bradley's smile faltered. "Sky Globe has strict non-discrimination policies. Policies on paper, not in practice." Elise cut him off. Samantha handed her a tablet. Elise held it up. "For 6 months, my team has documented discriminatory incidents on Sky Globe flights. Mystery shoppers with identical tickets treated differently based on race, religion, gender. The disparities aren't just disturbing, they're legally actionable." Bradley's face went pale. Cameras zoomed in on his expression. "Perhaps we can discuss this privately," he muttered. "We can offer you our corporate jet." Elise's reply was sharp. "Today wasn't unfortunate. It was inevitable. When you build a culture on exclusion, when you tell colleagues some people don't know their place, this is the result." The crowd gasped again as Bradley's own words, spoken earlier, were thrown back at him. Then, one by one, passengers stepped forward. A black businesswoman. "I've flown Sky Globe for 15 years. I've been randomly selected every single time." An elderly Asian man. "They made me change seats because a white passenger didn't want to sit next to me." Others followed, sharing their stories of humiliation. Smartphones streamed it all. Passengers who had shouted racist comments earlier began edging away, hoping not to be identified, but videos of them were already spreading on Twitter and Instagram. Elise gave each speaker respect before addressing the crowd again. "Discrimination isn't just morally wrong. It's bad business. Sky Globe has been losing market share for 8 quarters because it refuses to change. Consumers demand better. They deserve better." She turned back to Bradley. "I came here today not only as a passenger but as someone evaluating your airline for a $3 billion corporate contract. I was also considering a full acquisition of Sky Globe." The words hit like thunder. Bradley looked as though the ground had fallen beneath him. "But based on what I've experienced, I cannot recommend Sky Globe to my partners, not without fundamental change." By now, the confrontation was the top trending topic worldwide. Sky Globe reckoning and Elise Washington flooded feeds. Live streams had hundreds of thousands of viewers. 3 Sky Globe board members arrived at the terminal, faces grim. "Miss Washington," the lead director said, "we'd like to convene an emergency board meeting immediately." "That's exactly what I called for an hour ago," Elise replied. Inside the premium lounge, the board assembled. Large screens showed directors joining remotely. Elise and her legal team laid out evidence, emails dismissing diversity, statistics of bias, testimony from employees. Halfway through, Bradley's breathing grew labored. He clutched his chest, slumped sideways. Panic erupted. Elise took charge. "Call an ambulance." She loosened his tie, placed him in recovery position. Cameras captured the image, the woman he'd humiliated, ensuring he was cared for. Paramedics arrived. Diagnosis: severe stress reaction, not a heart attack. As they wheeled Bradley out, he looked at Elise with shock, perhaps gratitude. With Bradley gone, the board reconvened. Within 30 minutes, they suspended him immediately, naming an interim CEO from outside Sky Globe. They pledged a full investigation, independent oversight, and comprehensive reforms. "Real change requires more than apologies," Elise told them. "It requires a cultural shift from the top down. I'll be watching." Within a week, the airline industry witnessed something unprecedented. The interim board chair, Dr. Janet Rivera, the first Latina in such a position, stood before reporters in Manhattan. After careful consideration, "Sky Globe Airlines will suspend all operations effective immediately," she announced. Shockwaves rippled worldwide. Never before had an airline this large voluntarily grounded its entire fleet outside of a national emergency. Over 250 aircraft sat idle at airports. 21,000 employees were placed on paid leave. The cost? $35 million a day. Some ask why such a drastic measure is necessary. Rivera continued. The answer is simple. Sometimes you must tear down the foundation to rebuild properly. Sky Globe's discrimination wasn't a superficial issue. It was structural, embedded in its culture from top to bottom. At terminals worldwide, Sky Globe counters stood empty. Kiosks displayed temporarily unavailable. Fleets were towed into storage. It looked like the end of an era. Employees who once participated in discriminatory practices began speaking out. Meredith Thompson, the gate agent who first denied a lease, admitted tearfully on CNN, "We were trained to scrutinize certain passengers. It was never called racial profiling, but that's what it was. I can't change what I did, but I can help make sure it never happens again." Meanwhile, Bradley Winters lay in recovery at New York Presbyterian Hospital. For the first time in decades, he was quiet. Sources said he repeated softly to staff, "She was right." 2 weeks later, independent auditors released findings worse than expected. Discrimination was systemic. Policies encouraged bias under coded language like passenger comfort and security concerns. The ripple effect spread to competitors. United launched a review of customer service. Delta created an independent oversight committee. American announced mandatory anti-bias training. The Sky Globe reckoning has forced every airline to confront practices they've ignored for decades, said analyst Maria Chen. 3 months later, the Department of Transportation introduced new rules requiring airlines to track and publish passenger treatment data by demographics. Insurance companies began offering lower rates to airlines with strong anti-discrimination programs. Industry associations introduced certification for equity in service. At LaGuardia's Gate 37B, the ground zero of it all, renovations began. The old Sky Globe sign was torn down. New signage promised, "Coming soon, a new way to fly." Workers installed accessibility features, prayer rooms, multilingual signage, and inclusive artwork. 6 months after suspending operations, Sky Globe relaunched under new leadership. Their first symbolic flight, New York to Singapore. Captain Diane Rodriguez, the airline's first Latina chief pilot, sat in the cockpit. Lead flight attendant Michael Chen, who once sued the airline for discrimination, had returned under the new regime. Bradley never returned to aviation. But quietly, he began volunteering with organizations focused on minority youth economic opportunities, a surprising epilogue to a career once defined by exclusion. The industry had changed forever. Other airlines restructured, governments legislated oversight, and passengers demanded accountability. It all began because one woman refused to accept being denied her rightful boarding and seat.